Hello, everyone. It's Tim Richter here. We're just going to let everybody log in and we'll get started in just a minute. Okay, good day, everybody. It's Tim Richter here from the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. Thank you for joining us. I'm thrilled to be here with my new friend Nik Nanos to talk to you about a poll that we released this morning on housing and homelessness. So a few quick housekeeping things before we get started. Our agenda today is pretty straightforward. I'm just going to do a brief introduction, then we'll have Nik walk through the polling results with you. Then we'll have a question and answer period, and then we will wrap and leave you to your day. Just a couple of things for you to note. Everyone is muted. We've got about 250 people registered for this webinar, so we muted everyone, but please use the question and answer tab to ask any questions that you have. When we get to the question and answer period, I will be asking the questions. And use the chat function to share comments and speak to other participants. Let us know where you're from, what you think. We will be posting a recording of the webinar on Recovery for All, and you'll no doubt see some of this online. Now, I am pleased to introduce our speaker today, Nik Nanos. Nik he leads Nanos Research, which is one of Canada's most distinguished research companies. We did a lot of searching around to figure out who the right partner for this project was going to be, and Nik and his company came to the top of the list very quickly, very well regarded in Ottawa and across Canada. He's the chief data scientist and founder of Nanos Research, a global fellow at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Washington, D.C., a professor at State University of New York in Buffalo, and he's also past chair of the Board of Governors at Carleton University, my alma mater in Ottawa. Nik leads a team behind the Bloomberg Nanos Canadian Confidence Index, which is considered a must-have resource for private sector executives and also featured weekly segments in CTV News, Nanos by the Numbers, which focus on the latest political, business, and social trends. You have no doubt seen him on CTV News as their pollster, also in the Globe and Mail and Bloomberg. Without further ado, I will pass things over to Nik, and he'll go through the survey that he completed for us. Go ahead, Nik.
Okay, so let me share my screen. Thank you, Tim, for that introduction. Maybe, Tim, you can just confirm that the screen shows on your end, then I'll know everybody can see.
Yep.
Super. So, hello, everybody. We're very pleased to do this extremely important project. You know, we're in the midst of a pandemic. There's economic certainty, and putting the spotlight on housing and homelessness is critically important for everyone, and everyone should take an interest in this particular issue. And what we did was work together with the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness to develop some questions and measures in order to unpack what is going on out there when it comes to homelessness and the proximity of that as an issue to average and everyday Canadians. People's concern about paying the rent, paying their mortgage, views on whether homelessness and tackling homelessness and the effort to end homelessness, how urgent or not urgent that might be, and also views on affordable housing and what type of priority that should be. So that said, before I kind of dig into the numbers, one thing that I would like to say, I'll call it, I'm going to geek out for a second, you know, kind of pollster geek out in terms of the methodology. So this was a national survey. This is hot off the press. The survey was actually just completed 2 weeks ago, or a little less than 2 weeks ago. It's a national survey. It's a random representative sample, which means it was a probability sample. It's accurate plus or minus 3.0 percentage points, 19 times out of 20. When we start talking about some of the subgroups, and you can see on this slide subgroups, for example, individuals in the prairies or 35 to 54-year-olds, the margin of error will be a little wider because those are smaller subsamples. When we're talking about the national number, it's accurate, plus or minus 3.0 percentage points, 19 times out of 20. So without further ado, let's dig into the numbers. You know, one of the first things that we wanted to kind of get into is to get a sense of what type of urgency, if any, the whole concept of working to end homelessness might be. And why it's important to ask this is because the fact of the matter is there are a lot of competing pressures on government right now, federal and provincial. They have health pressures in terms of fighting the pandemic. They have economic pressures because people are not working. There's a significant number of Canadians that are not even participating in the workplace, and unemployment is at a high that we haven't seen for a very long time. There's significant fiscal pressure on federal and provincial governments right now. And what we wanted to do was to get a sense from Canadians in this whole environment where there are lots of critical pressures. How does homelessness and the fight to end homelessness stack up? And you can see when we ask Canadians on a 10-point scale, where 0 was not at all urgent and 10 was very urgent, you can see a full 7 out of every 10 Canadians scored it urgent in terms of a 7, 8, 9, or 10 out of 10. Actually, only 9% said that it wasn't urgent. So, basically by a factor of 7 to 1, Canadians are more likely to say that this is an urgent priority, even in the context of fighting a pandemic where people are worried about whether their mother or father might have access to health care or whether their son and daughter can get a job or gets called back to work. This is still identified as an urgent priority by a significant proportion of Canadians. And when you see the table on the right, we have all the standard demographic groups, and then we also have a couple of other groups that we wanted to put a focus on: owners and renters, right? Individuals that rent where they live and people that own their home. And you can see these usually votes Liberal, usually votes Conservative, usually votes NDP. And before you ask, the reason they're in that order is because it's based on the number of seats in the House of Commons. So Conservatives, don't be upset that you're not first because you're alphabetically senior. So, but we basically, one of the profiling questions that we asked was, which party do they usually vote for when it comes to federal elections? Not who you're voting for today, but the party that you usually vote for. And we wanted to get a sense of variations, if any, across the Canadians who self-identify with different federal political parties. But you can see in terms of some of the numbers that really pop, you can see there's a significant difference between men and women, even though it's still a very exceptionally strong score among men, 6.9 out of 10, but 8.1 out of 10 among women out there. And you can also see that if you're over 55 years of age, you're more likely to identify it as an urgent priority. Not a big surprise. If you happen to be someone who self-identifies as a progressive voter, either a Liberal or New Democrat, you're more likely to give it a higher score. But even those Conservative numbers are pretty good. The vast majority of Conservatives, people who self-identify as supporters of the Conservative Party of Canada, a majority still cite the fight to end homelessness as being important. And keep an eye on those rent and homeowners numbers, because you can see that this issue directly connects and is of material importance to Canadians who rent their home. We also wanted to get into support for building new affordable housing. And you can see that more than 8 out of every 10 Canadian supporters somewhat support a scenario where new affordable housing is built that is intended to not only deal to end homelessness, but to help economically stimulate the economy. And not to get overly technical, but from a math perspective, we would call this a slam dunk. When you look at the groups on the side, there's a very comfortable majority, right? Remember, a majority is 50% plus 1. Well, nothing's even close to a weak majority. A very comfortable to an absolutely strong majority of Canadians support or somewhat support this. It doesn't matter what part of the country that you live in. It doesn't really matter whether you're male or female, whether you're young or old, even for the different parties. 71% of people that usually vote for the Conservatives support or somewhat support building affordable housing and kind of linking that to economic stimulus. So on this particular front, almost a consensus view, but very consensus view, very strong numbers on this. Worry, you know, in a lot of the research that we've been doing during the pandemic, we've been tapping into the anxiousness, the anxiety, the worry that Canadians have on a full range of issues, including their health, their mental health, their fiscal situation. And what we wanted to do was put a finer point on getting a grip on the level of worry related to paying housing costs. And what we can see is that when we unpack the national number, about 16% of Canadians report that they're either worried or somewhat worried about paying their housing costs next month, right? We're not talking about next year or in the long term. We're talking about the next 30 days. So that would be, for example, in August, that when the rent or the mortgage comes due in the next 2 weeks, you can see that 17% of Canadians are worried or somewhat worried about that. But the number that pops is at the bottom of this table. Check it out, renters. 1 out of every 4 renters are worried or somewhat worried about paying the rent in the next 2 weeks. It puts into focus the level of concern that people have and the worry that people have about their current economic situation. And, you know, think of it this way, you know, when we think about essentials, food and housing are the 2 essentials that Canadians, I shouldn't even say aspire to, but they're essentials that everyone needs to have a basic living and to live. And I think the fact that 25% of renters outright say that they're worried or somewhat worried about them being able to pay the rent in the next 14 days is puts this into focus in terms of the level of anxiety when it comes to housing costs. The other thing that quite struck me, you know, a lot of times do these surveys and we kind of try to figure out, is it important? Is it urgent? Or can it wait? And how close is an issue to people? And if I could use an example, and you know, whenever we do polling on foreign policy, it usually doesn't track that well, except if it's connected to jobs, because you know, what happens from a foreign policy perspective doesn't necessarily touch the day-to-day lives of Canadians. And this is a bit of a proximity read. And you can see in the survey that we did, 1 out of every 20 Canadians self-identified as having been homeless at one point in their life. Another 10% said a family member, they reported a family member had been homeless. 21%, or 1 out of every 5 Canadians, say someone close to them has been homeless. So the fact of the matter is about 4 out of every 10 Canadians have been directly touched or implicated or have had an interest in homelessness, either because they have been homeless, a loved one has been homeless, or a close friend or acquaintance has been homeless. And you know, we talked about renters before. Check out the renters number. You can see the difference between owners, homeowners, and renters. You can see that renters are much less likely to report that they don't know anyone that's been homeless. And the flip side to that is that they are more likely to know someone or to have been homeless themselves. And I think from all the numbers, this puts into context, you know, think of it this way, you know, when you're walking down the street in your neighborhood and you pass 5 of your, you pass 4 of your neighbors, 1 of you have had a direct connection to homelessness. And this is a real issue that affects the day-to-day lives of Canadians, and probably explains, you know, why they care so much and want action on homelessness. So I'm going to wrap up with a couple 2 slides before I pass it back over to Tim. So some of the key takeaways, you can see 36% know or themselves have been homeless, and that this particular issue is important and actually means something to Canadians in terms of its impact on them personally, and explains why they have a sense of urgency for something to get done. Overall, 16% of Canadians are worried about, or somewhat worried about, paying the cost of housing in the next month, and that number pops to 24%, or 1 out of every 4 among renters. There's a significant proportion of Canadians that believe that this is urgent, and you know, when I put this into context, you know, many times when the folks that we do work with, organizations like the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, they're advocating and they're talking to legislators and they're talking to policymakers. Sometimes what they're told by policymakers is, oh, I really like you a lot and the stuff that you do is wonderful, important, but this isn't really a very good time to do something. If you're a legislator or a policymaker, you should look at this number and realize that there is a sense of urgency to act. This is not an issue to kick the can on in the future. We know that there are a lot of priorities. Canadians understand there are a lot of demands on limited funds, but this has to be a tier 1 issue to deal with. And I think one of the reasons why is because it has the potential to have that virtuous circle of not just the social good, not just the good of trying to end homelessness, but also the economic good in terms of stimulus and how interlinking the building of affordable housing can create a social and an economic good at the same time. And I think that's why the research really has what I would consider a very powerful message. And no big surprise, Canadians understand, 84% of Canadians understand this whole idea of connecting, ending homelessness, building affordable housing, and connecting that to the economy and stimulating the economy is that virtuous circle that we can use to not only navigate in this environment, but help lay the foundation to try to end that aspirational goal of trying to end homelessness. And, you know, you can see, you know, for Canadians who usually, 94% of Canadians who usually vote, even among conservatives, you know, and I say this without judgment, you know, sometimes people try to cast aspersions on conservative voters. Well, a pretty comfortable majority of conservative voters, or people that are likely to vote conservative, are on board with this. So this isn't just an issue of right or left. There's general support right across the board for action to end homelessness. So, and with that, Tim, I'm going to, what did they say? Am I supposed to do like a golf club, like over to you, Tim, and then I will stop sharing my screen, and then we'll open it up.
You could do it that way if you like. I think that's fair. All right. So we're going to open up for some questions. If anybody has questions, please use the Q&A panel. There's a few coming in, but I got a couple that I wanted to make sure I added for you. So, were there any surprises in here for you? You do a mountain of polling on all manner of different issues. Was there anything that really struck you?
Well, I think the one thing that struck me was the, you know, the proximity of the issue. This goes back to 5% of Canadians reporting that at some point in their life they had been homeless, and I would expect that this is kind of underreported because there's still a stigma related to homelessness. But the fact of the matter, the fact that 21% of Canadians, or about 1 out of every 5, has a close friend or acquaintance that has been homeless, really drives home the point that this isn't an issue about something that happens someplace else or to other people. This is an issue that that directly touches a significant proportion of the population.
Mm-hmm. How does the level of support you see here? You know, because I'm imagining, you know, policymakers are dealing with a whole lot of issues that they need to juggle. They have to make priorities on where they spend their money. They have to think about what matters to Canadians for the pandemic recovery. If put this into context of all of those other issues for us, just as you've seen, like we can't directly compare because we haven't polled everything, but how does this place in the context of all those other demands on government's time and interest?
Yeah, I think one thing that's different about this issue is, when we think of public policy initiatives, many times they're like silos, right? So our public health authorities give the best advice to fight the pandemic. They don't think about the cost. That's all they're doing, is using the science to give the best solution to fight the pandemic. In the same way, when the government creates a program to help small enterprises, it's about very focused and targeted, and it's like the silo of helping small businesses and enterprises. What's interesting about this is that homelessness has a health dimension, it has a social dimension, and by building affordable housing, it has an economic dimension. So it cuts across all those three things. And I think that's why it makes the fight to end homelessness a great candidate, because it's more than just a silo, and it has health implications, economic implications, and social implications.
Great. So a question from Diane. She's wondering, as the respondents skew toward homeowners, do the respondents also skew toward higher income households?
So first of all, Diane, homeowners in the survey are represented to the true population proportion, which means there are not too many homeowners in the survey. And by looking at your question, we'd say, well, Canada skews towards homeowners because there are more homeowners than renters in Canada. So what we have is the natural incidence of homeowners in the survey, but the survey does not skew towards higher income households. That said, and here's a little polling trivia for you, Diane. One of the questions that some people don't like to answer is income. They're okay with saying, you know, what gender they are. They're okay with saying their level of education. So there's a significant proportion of Canadians that just refuse to say how much their household income is. But based on the numbers that we have, it does not overly represent more affluent Canadians.
Nancy's asking, do you know if we have copies of the stat slides that we prepare to go for proposals, local governments, and information? Very helpful. Nancy, if you look in the chat, Zane has posted a link, recoveryforall.ca/poll. That's where you can get the complete report there. We've got another question here. Is it not the case that what people answer on a survey is often quite different from their support for a political party's policies?
No. How's that for an answer? To be long and not to be overly winded. So, you know, for our firm at least, you know, we have among the most distinguished records of reliability and accuracy over 30 years. We've never been embarrassed. You know, the other thing is that when you dig into the tables, you'll see that there's a significant proportion of Canadians that actually don't strongly align with any of the political parties. And you know, the fact of the matter is that there are some Canadians that aren't satisfied with any of the parties that are on the political agenda right now. So when you look at if you go back and look at those tables, you'll see that it doesn't add up. If you took the numbers, it doesn't add up to 100 because we just focused on the top 3 major parties. But no, we haven't had any issue. And you know, the thing is, we weren't asking how people voted. If we had asked, here's another little quick piece of trivia. If we had asked how they had voted in the last election, that actually might have been a little different, because people tend not to want to admit that their vote for a loser, which is why we've asked the question, which party do you usually vote for?
Edward is asking, or Ed McNabb is asking, data in general is good and this data is excellent, and he's asking for some advice on how we use it to affect government investment policy, and perhaps more importantly, how do we support the Alliance to affect the necessary policy decisions? Now, you've done a lot of work on advocacy campaigns. Might have some good advice here.
So, you know, the way, Edward, the way I would suggest that you look at this as to use the research results as supporting documentation to focus the legislator, because the first thing that a legislator will want to know, or a policymaker will want to know, is how do people think about what you're asking? Is there support for it? And how urgent is it? And I would suggest that what you do is highlight the stats, share the whole research report that you can get through the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness website. Share the whole report, but highlight some of the key stats related to your specific ask. And if you happen to be in a region where we have a sufficient subsample, so if you happen to live in Ontario or in British Columbia, then I would suggest that you might want to put a highlight on the regional numbers if that makes sense. But you know, you stay focused on what makes for good public policy and stay focused on your ask. Just use the research basically to say you should take us seriously and you should take what we are asking for extremely seriously. And that's what I would recommend.
That's great. Richard's wondering about any information from the survey around a guaranteed basic income or livable income or universal basic wage that would assist with housing, providing access to people who are homeless. Now, we didn't ask specifically about guaranteed income or anything, but have you seen other data related to that and where that sort of fits in with what Canadians are thinking?
Yeah, so we didn't ask that in this survey, but this issue is, you know, you put a spotlight on the next big issue that Canadians are going to deal with post-CERB, and with the enhanced employment insurance regime that will be coming on board. It will probably be the perfect time to discuss a basic guaranteed income, but it's a little too early right now because you know, Canadians still haven't transitioned to that new model. But I would say in the future, it's going to be something that everyone's going to need to look at. And you know, the disruption that we've had now is it's like the Depression. It's a once in a generation or once in generations event. This should really be a time for us to be, as a country, to be rethinking, do we have the right social programs? How do we remake and renew our social programs in order to meet our future needs? And I think that's one of the things that you know, for anyone interested in ending homelessness, that's the frame that it should be. It should be, let's rethink. This is a time to rethink how we want to fight and end homelessness in Canada, and we need to be part of that conversation, and we have some solutions.
Charlene's asking if there's any stats on youth who have been involved in the child welfare system. And Charlene, I'd encourage you that the best place to go for that is Away Home Canada. They do a lot of work on youth homelessness, as well as the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness. Both have excellent resources on youth and child intervention system involvement. I know they've done some fairly detailed research on that and have some really good data. Diane's asking, the report says a majority of Canadians identify homelessness as urgent, responding 7 out of 10 on a 10-point scale. But given people don't want to seem heartless, this isn't surprising. How many rated it as a 9 or 10?
I'm just getting that right now. How's this? 40%, 4 out of every 10 rated it a 9 or at every 10. So this is more than just people not wanting to be heartless. And I'd also like to say that it's easier to be heartless online than it is by telephone. On telephone, people don't want to be heartless. But you know, what we find is whenever we're doing research on controversial topics, and I would put homelessness in that category, people tend to be very forthright in the same way that when we're doing online surveys, people tend to be, I don't want to say more racist, but racist views really rise much higher in an online survey than they would in a telephone survey when human being is talking to human being. So I don't think we have to worry about people trying to be nice on the online survey. They'd probably be just as mean as they would be in person.
We do see that as well. A question from another individual is asking, why do you think Atlantic Canadians regard addressing homelessness as urgent or highest in Canada, but have a lower levels of worry about it than other regions?
Yeah, and this is where we get into the limitations of the research. And you know, as a researcher, I have to put a spotlight not just on the strengths of the research, but potential limitations. The subsample for Atlantic Canada, because Atlantic Canada only represents less than 1 out of every 10 Canadians, is smaller than the rest. And the margin of error for that is much wider than the national survey. It's plus or minus, I would expect about plus or minus 10 percentage points, 19 times out of 20. So there's going to be a little bit of wiggle. So don't clutch your chest if you're from Atlantic Canada when you see the number, because there's a little bit of movement in that just because of the size of the sample.
Yeah, that actually answers a couple of questions. So good. I just think there's a couple of questions about asking if there's an earlier poll or earlier data to benchmark against. There really isn't. There was a poll done 10 years ago, I think, that did ask one question about this, but I don't think you could sort of compare apples to apples in this case. And I'm not aware of any other research that's asked about personal connection. So I think this is frankly fairly groundbreaking stuff, and we may come back to Nik at some point in the future and using this as kind of our benchmark. Just looking quickly through questions here. Oh yeah, Kira's just asking, just missed how many people rated addressing homelessness is a 9 out of 10, and that's about 40%.
Yeah,
so,
a 9 or a 10 out of 10. Yeah, 40% rated at a 9 or a 10 out of 10.
I think that just about covers it. Unless Nik, there was anything that you wanted to add, or any thoughts that you had in addition to what you've put forward here.
Yeah, I think I think one thing that I'd like to add is, you have to think about how you could use this, and it's always good to have what I'll say proof points in terms of level of support and urgency. But don't think that you should go in and do a briefing on a survey. You don't need to do that. That's not the main mission. The main mission is to end homelessness and to propose solutions for that. The purpose of the survey is to put a spotlight on support that Canadians have for the good work that you do.
That's great. Thank you, Nik. So just before we wrap, I wanted to highlight a couple of things. This survey was conducted as part of our Recovery for All campaign. And what I want to highlight for everyone, that the time for us is now. Like, we can't go back to normal. We hear a lot about that, returning to normal or reopening. We can't go back to normal. Normal is a place where 235,000 different Canadians experience homelessness a year, where life expectancy is cut in half by prolonged homelessness. So we can't go back to normal. But there is an opportunity for us here right now, as COVID has pushed governments to set aside what is kind of the normal or ordinary politics or the conventional policy making, and that creates an opportunity. Things that the government is doing today would have been considered fairly crazy to even consider probably in January or February. So the time is now for us to really push. We know that the recovery planning is underway now. We don't know when there's going to be a federal budget. Could be in the fall, could be in the spring, but we do know with certainty that they are developing those plans and will be negotiating with other parties in the House of Commons. We have a really unique political situation right now with a minority government and a progressive federal parliament. One of the things you notice from the data that Nik has presented is that support for ending homelessness and support for investing in housing is across party lines, right? And that is a really unique circumstance. And as you know, so we have strong public support. We've also outlined an affordable and achievable path to ending homelessness for folks, and you can see that on our Recovery for All site. So we need you, right? We need you to join the campaign and sign up. Most of you would have heard about this webinar through signing up, but we need you to sign up and get your friends to sign up. Follow us on social media. There's a ton of information that's going to be added there through our Facebook and our Twitter pages. We're also on Instagram, but again, I'm like way too old to do that. And I know we have Instagram, but I'll get my teenage son to help me find that. I'd also encourage you, one of the things that we're understanding about political campaigning these days is how important individuals can be with social media and the technology that's available to us. Each of you are influencers, and that's important for you to help us out by reaching out to your social and professional networks and sharing the information on the campaign. And finally, please call or write your member of parliament. Call them if you can. Send them a letter. If you join the campaign, we'll be asking you to send different letters to members of parliament through an automated system that we have. So far, the 16,000 supporters in our campaign have sent over 105,000 letters to parliament. This poll, the media coverage, those kind of actions are going to be key to getting the outcome that we want. So with that, thank you all very much. Thank you to Nik. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have any other questions or you would like to join the campaign. Thank you all very much. Have a terrific day. We will all be in touch soon for sure. Thank you all. Thanks, Nik.
See you.